for another service to do that for them. Nothing wrong with that. It allows you to get set up very, very quickly in your application. But when it comes to a micro SaaS, that's really the focus. How fast can I deliver this thing? So that way we can have a single solution, which is the micro part of it. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to deliver value, and I'm trying to make sure that I can scale this over time to $5,000 to $10,000 monthly recurring revenue. Now, a couple key figures in that. Oftentimes you'll hear, and maybe not the MRR, but you'll hear the customers, right? I'm trying to get my first 100 customers. And that's great, but something that we're going to be touching on throughout this talk is, what does it look like when you have your next 1,000 customers? How are your pieces scaling with you as you get that sort of growth? So I saw this tweet. Now, I'm not going to shame anybody. It sounds like some of you saw it as well. Yeah, there are some services up here, and you tie them together so that you have essentially this Frankenstack of a side hustle. Nothing wrong with that, right? If you want to go ahead and stitch together your next great idea with 6 very different providers so that one is handling auth and one is handling your database, etc., that's fine. A lot of customers find success with that. I'm just worried about how this is going to scale in both price as well as performance. Now, a couple key players in here, the ones that are in red, I work at AWS. We are very customer obsessed. We don't really care too much about the competition. We focus on solutions. So I put those in red so that way we're not getting bogged down in who's who on the naughty list. Other players that aren't in red, they're common stuff, right? You're gonna need to style your application and they're using AWS. So I thought I'd include them. Now, I'm gonna keep touching on this, but there are a couple pros and cons when it comes to having a setup like that. The first one is that it's great. I mean, it's very quick to get that set up. You can have a weekend side hustle started on Friday, and then you can deploy it live to the world on Monday. Now, they offer simple and powerful integrations. Now, there's a little asterisk there because while they're simple and powerful, they do come with a caveat of maybe not having the best free tier limits. And you sort of see that when you get to their pricing models. They give you everything you need up front, but maybe not everything you need down the road. So there's day 1, but then there's also day 100. Also, when it comes to stitching these together, you have to be careful because what if one of them goes down and you've done all the manual work of putting them piece by piece in this puzzle, but now you have multiple points of failure, and I'm not cool with that, right? I need the whole thing to work. Otherwise, I need to go ahead and stitch those together myself. And then, of course, as I touched on a couple times now, the cost, it actually can quickly escalate depending on who's using your application, who's triggering what, or how many users you have. A big one is going to be with auth in particular. Oftentimes, they charge you by the amount of customers that have signed up to your application, but that doesn't differentiate between who's paying and who's just signing up to your app, right? It's something you have to think about. Now, okay, I played that side. I showed you the tweet. We talked about the pros and cons, but to be fair, let's go ahead and see what this looks like on AWS, right? Okay, so you have this handsome customer who is gonna go ahead and go to this Next.js application. Great. These are gonna be all the services that it would take to get a micro SaaS up and running on AWS. This is a very, very common stack because of both performance, it's fully managed, it's serverless, which means that the cost and the scalability go hand in hand. So we are going to be talking about most of these. Some of these we don't have to bother with, right? There's Lambda. I think a lot of us in the room are probably familiar with a serverless function. But for the vast majority, we're going to have to touch base and see how this fits into the general pipeline. So what are the pros and cons here? Well, they're quick to get set up. You might not think that because if you're going through the AWS console, which can be intimidating, if you're doing that, then yeah, it's going to take you some time to get up and running with that. But I'm going to show you what I use whenever I'm building out applications and what I see customers finding the most success with. Also, we offer simple integrations. It's AWS. All of the services go hand in hand with one another. So when it comes to having my auth provider talk to my API that talks to my database, it just kind of works because it's all under the same umbrella. And then the pricing. This is actually very, very important because it comes down to what services that you're picking. I'm choosing to pick the ones that are serverless. I'm choosing to pick the ones that offer free tiers and that are fully managed. The less code I have to write, the better the world is. And I like to keep it that way. But then there's also a single point of failure, right? This is in the con area, but there's an asterisk there. So if all of my resources are deployed in one region, what happens if that single region goes down, right? Well, the cool thing is that I can deploy my application to multiple regions, including my database. Our database, which is DynamoDB, offers global tables. So it'll just sort of cache at a various network. Manual stitching still happens, still got to do it. Can't really get away from it. The way that AWS works is that our services very much so act as independent startups. So just like some insider knowledge for you. All of the services that we have, they're pretty much just a very well-funded startup. So we had to stitch those together. Not so bad because, again, they're under the AWS scheme, but something you have to keep in mind. And then the cost can quickly escalate, right? If you don't pick the right services, then you have to be mindful of what's happening. Am I setting up EC2 instances, which is a server? Right? We're not doing that here. We're purposely not doing that here. So that way we can avoid that issue altogether. Okay, so you're not used to AWS. You log into the console and you see this, right? You're like, I don't know how anybody new to AWS would ever go through the 200 plus services and be like, these are the ones that I need. You kind of have that tribal knowledge, like somebody has to tell you. So to be fair, this isn't even all of the services. I wanted to get the meme in there also. So we have about 2/3 of them. There's still another 50 or so that are missing. But yeah, it's a lot. But the reality is that as you saw from that architecture diagram earlier, there's really only 6 or so that you need. And that's what I see a lot of customers finding success with, both internally in my own personal development, but then also out in the wild with customers that are scaling to thousands, if not millions, of operations per second. So what is the magical tool that brings us all together and that just makes setting up AWS so much easier so that we don't have to click through the console? Well, it's going to be another AWS service called the Cloud Development Kit, or CDK. The reason front-end engineers find it so compelling is because it allows you to write your code in TypeScript. So instead of clicking through the AWS console, you simply define what you need in a language that you're already familiar with because, let's face it, TypeScript is a new cool kid on the block, and that's just what we like to use. So in this example, we are setting up a database. Right? This is a DynamoDB table. It's a NoSQL table. And we just give it a name. We say, hey, how do you want to bill? I want to bill, just bill me per request, which is the on-demand billing. And then I set up a partition key. Everything in my database is going to have a unique ID. Now, of course, this isn't doing justice to what a real world database setup would look like. I'm just simplifying it because this is what is required. You can, of course, get very fancy with how you set up your database, but this is all you need to get started. Next up, we have an S3 bucket. You saw above that that's going to be handling our images. All you need to do is just tell it what scope in your application you're working with, and then give it a name. Okay, so going back to that architecture diagram, what are the services that you should really focus on? Which, in another ways of saying it, what are the services that you don't need to worry about when you're trying to scale to, again, $5,000 to $10,000 monthly recurring revenue? Well, the first one actually isn't even an AWS service. Right? What about your payments? If I'm trying to make money, who's going to be taking the money? I use Stripe. This one is actually the most obfuscated one that you can have in your pipeline. I'm using Stripe because I am a big fan of how they do their billing and how they have their integration set up. But there are other fantastic providers out there, such as Lemon Squeezy, Clerk, and then other new kids on the block as well. What we're seeing right here is one of their newer features that I just really, really love. It's their Stripe pricing table. So what you do is you just go to the Stripe console, you tell it what prices you want, you say, hey, put these in a table for me, and they give you the code so that you can put it in your application. The other part that we'll see in the demo is going to be the customer billing portal. This is a managed solution where the customer will get a login link, and then they decide what plan they want to be on, if they want to cancel, change their card, etc. Really, really cool, because if you've ever had to wire that up yourself, you know how much of a pain it can be. Okay, so on to the AWS services. The first one is I want my customers to log in. In fact, a common flow that you see is that before you even go to sign up and use the services themselves, before you pay, you need to set up an account. So we use Amazon Cognito to do all of that. What you're seeing right here is real world CDK code that I see in all of my applications and as well as customer applications. What we're doing here is we're just giving our pool, essentially where we're going to store all of our users. We're giving that a name. I'm saying, yeah, go ahead and let them sign themselves up, AKA let them create their own accounts. We'll come back to that Lambda trigger, but then one thing that if you ever implemented sign up and auth yourself, you've probably forgotten is, hey, what happens when my customer forgets their password? At AWS, we call this, all of this stuff right here, undifferentiated heavy lifting. Essentially, that means undifferentiated, what are the things that are common to most apps, and heavy lifting, but they're hard to do. That's the stuff that we take care of. That's why we have so many services. Going down the list, you can kind of read from the schema here what's happening, right? Certain attributes are required. Then we do verify their email as well. This is done through code authentication. So they line in, or they sign in, and then they get sent an email with a code. We talked about this earlier, but we have DynamoDB in the mix. This is actually a real world scenario here where, sure, you have a table, you have that set up. It is being partitioned by an ID, which is great. That allows you to get a certain item from the database because the IDs will be unique. But what happens when you need to get all of the products from your database from a certain user? Well, in that case, we add what is known as a global secondary index. Essentially, it says, hey, I have this database. It's modeled this way. Go ahead and just flip the fields so that that partition key is going to be something else. Really powerful. A lot of customers, if you're not used to AWS, you might have tossed away NoSQL databases because of this aspect, but it's something that we do have, and customers just kind of always take advantage of it. Things that you'll point out, or that I'll point out rather, are going to be the pricing, right? You get 50 gigabytes per account per month, which is kind of crazy when you think about it because we don't charge for the accounts that you have. So if you ever get high in that aspect, you're just creating another, create another account, and then you get the free billing all over again. Highly performant, fully serverless, it's managed for you. Then we have the crown jewel, and this is near and dear to my heart because I'm heavily biased because I'm on the team. But this is going to be AWS AppSync. It is the newer service. It's only been out since 2018, I believe, which is 2 years prior to when I joined. But you can see the sort of benefits that you get. When you first create your AWS account, most services give you a 12-month, 1 year free tier plan. The one when it comes to AppSync is going to be 250,000 queries and mutations per month. We also give you WebSockets out of the box. You just set up your API and you get both an HTTP endpoint as well as a WebSocket endpoint for real-time stuff. Not only is it serverless, but it's functionless, which is kind of crazy. We do a lot of direct integration so that when it comes to your API talking to your database, essentially there's no Lambda, there's no server, it just goes. And that's sort of the benefit of having it underneath this AWS umbrella. These services can talk directly to one another. In addition to going from the API to the database, you can also go from your authorization to your API. So I don't want everyone calling these endpoints, so I can protect it with Amazon Cognito. And you'll see, actually you can see right here in the screenshot, that directive, that at AWS Cognito user pools, that says automatically, and I can get more fine-grained if I wanted to, but it says nobody can call this endpoint unless they are a signed-in user, unless they're in my user pool, simply by having that line of code there. If GraphQL is somewhat new to you, I forgot to do my poll at the beginning. Just note, we have queries, mutations, and subscriptions. Queries are your get operations. Right? Mutations are how you're going to be changing data, updating, deleting, that kind of stuff. And then we have our recipe, which is going to be the product that we're trying to sell. You'll see that in the demo. AppSync is worthy of more than just one slide, though. So that was the schema aspect. But if you think about it, this thing is sitting in the middle of my entire pipeline, right? The front end needs to know about the API. The database needs to know about the API. So it's going to do a lot. In the last slide, you saw how the schema was set up. This is how that direct integration is going to be set up. It looks like a Lambda function. You write it in JavaScript like a Lambda function, but it's not. The team did some really smart and clever things so that customers can have that feel. But at the end of the day, we bundle it, and it gets transpiled into a common language known as VTL, so that customers don't have to write that ugly stuff, and it just sort of talks to whatever service you try to get to. In this case, the data source is going to be that database that we set up earlier, but you can also have it talk directly to a Lambda function. We can also do an HTTP endpoint, so you can just give it an arbitrary endpoint. In addition to RDS, a lot of fans loved using GraphQL with RDS, things of that nature. And then here in the request, this is essentially when you go to the database, do something, in this case, get the item, which is cool, like anybody can do that. But then if I'm doing if Christian, who is a coworker of mine, if he and I are both on the application, I don't want him, I love you, Christian, I don't want him to be able to get the items from my recipe store, right? That would be bad. So essentially I'm saying a quick check. If context.result.owner, essentially if the person that is trying to get this item doesn't equal, and then this is the cool part, context.identity.sub, that subfield is verified. It's coming straight from Cognito. And this knows that it's there because I had that at Cognito user pool. So that value is not going to be something passed in from the front end. That would be bad. It's going to be coming straight from the service itself. And then the last part, this is how you sort of piece it together within the CDK. So writing TypeScript, give your API name, tell it where the schema is at, and then be like, hey, what's the default authorization type that we're using here? It's going to be a user pool that I'm passing in as props. And then are there additional types? So I can have public users, in a sense. I can have custom users. I can have a Lambda function that calls some crazy other auth provider, right? And I can just write all my business logic in there. It's very forgiving. So let's take a moment to reflect on that stack, okay? Let's kind of walk through it here to see what's going on. This person, me, is going to this Next.js application. Cool. They're going to see a landing page. It's going to look fancy like every other landing page out there. And then we're going to use something called the JavaScript, amplified JavaScript libraries. These are going to be our bindings. It's going to allow our front end to talk to our back end using a set of configurations that you'll see in just a moment. That back end goes to Cognito. The user is apparently trying to sign in. And then we have a Lambda trigger. Now, this is sort of the glue that a lot of customers miss when they're trying to do this themselves. So we have that top Lambda trigger, which essentially says if a customer is trying to create their account for the very first time, that's cool. Cognito is going to put in a username, a sub, and as well as their email. But in a SaaS application, you want to know more, right? You want to know their subscription trial and whether or not they are on the tier plan, pro tier plan, and other additional information like that Cognito just doesn't handle. So in this case, we fire off a Lambda function to go to another database, a user table, and that's pretty much our source of truth in terms of what the users look like in our application. You see AppSync in the middle, just as we described, it's going to be talking to Cognito and our database. Down below, you have our S3 bucket. If I'm making a recipe application, I would probably want to store images there. A couple of key points to keep in mind is that those images from S3 aren't optimized at all. They're just there. So I'm going to use CloudFront. CloudFront's going to cache the images if I wanted to do that. But then I'm also going to say, you know what? I'm keeping track of all the images within my account. But I'm also going to use Cloudinary because even though CloudFront will cache it, Cloudinary has this really cool feature where you can give it a public endpoint. And whenever you request an image from Cloudinary, it will go to that public endpoint and just transfer the image and serve it to you on demand. So definitely take advantage of that. A lot of customers aren't aware of that, but I work closely with the Cloudinary team, and that's something that they definitely emphasize as a best practice. Then lastly, on the end, anytime a customer creates a subscription, updates it or deletes it, you see Stripe on the far right-hand side, which is going to fire off a Lambda function and update the user table. Okay, I feel like that was a lot of talking. Let's go ahead and go with the demo. Perfect. Real quick, we're gonna hop into localhost. And we have this SaaS application that I made, right? Typical SaaS app, you wanna have a compelling intro. We're gonna be selling recipes. So this is what we have. You can go ahead and get started today. Typical stuff that you'll typically find, I feel like I'm saying typically a lot, is after you have your landing page, you're going to have sort of your features, have a testimonial, and then a footer. This is true for most of the applications that I see. User's gonna sign up. We're gonna talk to Cognito. Create the account. Boom, boom. My social security number. I was wondering, does that joke land in the year? Yeah? Okay, cool. I'm creating the account. So far, this user is not in my user pool. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this code. There we go. One. Is that email there? Is that will add with incognito or incognito? It is. Yeah, Cognito will, when you are in development, and you don't have to be in development, but something to keep in mind is that email that I just got sent, I never actually set that up. Cognito will give you 200 per day out of the box. So as you're getting up to speed, you don't have to worry about anything higher until you're ready for prod. Check it out, my user pool. I'm gonna bump up the size real quick. If I refresh this, boom, I have a user now within my user pool. That's great, but I should have someone in my database as well. Here is that database, no one in it. Let's run it. You see that I have the customer ID. This is that webhook that got triggered from my application. I'm setting them to perspective, so this is not Stripe doing anything. So then back in my application, I was lazy and I didn't create a route. So let's go to recipes. Nothing crazy to see here. I just want to show off a couple of endpoints. One is going to be this customer billing portal. Right now, this customer is, oh, I'm sorry, did I not price this out? I'm skipping ahead. Customer created their account. You can only get here if you have a correct login. So let's put them on a trial plan. 4-2 all the way. 4-2. I'm not even going to pretend like I know what you all are doing with the postal code situation here. It's throwing me off. So this is going to be a free tier. So right now, recall that I was prospective, right? So this is Stripe. I'm no longer on my web page. So when this gets done processing, thank you. If I go back to my database, it's prospective currently. And if I refresh, we're now on the recipe basic, and we're now trialing, okay? Over my application, sorry, I need like 2 more minutes. Over my application, now if I go to that recipes page and I try to update my subscription, Stripe billing portal is going to kick in. Again, I'm off of my website. It knows my email address. I'm going to click send. This is the scary part where I show you all my email. Cool. Got it right here. I'm going to click log in. It takes me to their own self-managed billing portal, and I have all this cool stuff that I can work with. I didn't have to write any of this. I can update my plan, cancel it, change my card information. I'm going to switch off of the trial plan over to this $7 a month Recipe Pro plan. Quick confirm on this. A webhook should get triggered, and then from there, my status should change from Recipe Basic to Recipe Pro, allowing me to then, on my front end, be like, oh, this is a verified user. We can give them the Pro features. Just going to verify this real quick. And there we go, Recipe Pro. We're now active. I have a full working SaaS application. At this point, all the other operations are simple CRUD functionality. I'm going to switch back to the slides and wrap things up here. Current slide. Cool. Quick word. I purposely went down the route of choosing a micro SaaS because, to be honest, a lot of my friends and colleagues found themselves in situations this past year where they needed extra income all of a sudden. I think a lot of us know about friends and colleagues that may be in a similar situation. So I understand that the services here could be new, could be daunting, but I assure you that when it comes to reliably and securely setting up your application, this is the tried and true way. And hopefully, as you saw, it doesn't take too much effort. The code is open source. I do this to help out the community. So hopefully, if you find it valuable, check me out online. But with that, thank you for your time. And it's been a great time in London so far.
Thanks, Sid. If you have any questions, you can ask him out in the hall. Daniel's up next. Daniel, where are you? There you are. Okay. So we're going to swap real quick. I'm out of ChatGPT JavaScript jokes. I could just repeat them, which is what I did when I asked for 10 more. But I'll spare you that horror. So.
Okay.
It's like presenting at home, but in person.
I definitely had a blast and would recommend coming to this event the next time it's on. I'm not sure when they'll be on next, but it is a really good event to meet people who
Number 9 of 20, whose phone's gonna ring? Oh, yes, we've got a person, we got a winner. Let's give them a round of applause.
With some accent, but now most of you I think you're from Greece, so I don't have to pretend that I have an accent. I can speak Greek English, okay? And now we can continue to
the compact system, the barrier control. So it's quite a complex system.
It's really cool. Like I learned a lot from them. I also learned a lot of this.
Okay? And now, clap your hands.
Oh, it's funny. This venue has a very strict end time. So if we get from behind, the last speaker's screwed. And the last speaker's Kyle, and everyone wants to hear Kyle. So then it just means we cut breaks and lunch when people want breaks and lunch. So yeah. Are you ready back there? All right. Let's give it up for Daniel. Woo!
Hello. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be talking today about building elk. And if you are wondering to yourself, what is elk? That is fine. I will tell you. Just quickly, an introduction to tell you a bit about who I am. My name's Daniel Rowe. I'm on the Nuxt core team. In fact, I'm leading it. If you're not familiar with Nuxt, Nuxt is a framework for building web apps based on Vue. Here are a few of the projects I'm involved with. Feel free to check them out. And also obligatory social networks. So you can find me on Twitter at Daniel C. Rowe and also on Mastodon at daniel@rowe.dev. And if you're wondering what Mastodon is, that's fine, because I'm going to tell you all about it in a moment. What should I say? My background is I got involved in open source, which is what I do full-time at the moment, through agency world. So I had a small creative agency. We built apps for people. I pivoted the company into software as a service. We built a SaaS app. We sold that to lots of companies. And I got more and more involved in contributing to Nuxt until I was asked to be on a maintainer, then asked to be on the core team, and then asked just this year to lead the project. So my background is very much real-world apps. And I hope that what I'm going to share with you today is an example of building a real-world app. And I hope that we're able to go into some details that might be useful for you, no matter whether you're using Nuxt, Vue, or whatever. These are some things that we've learned in the process of building a real-world app based on Nuxt 3. This is a very important picture because it shows you my normal working environment. So my normal working environment is that I have one of my 3 cats probably on my keyboard or on my desk, sitting, blocking me from actually being able to do anything. I don't know, anyone else here have pets and actually let their pet dictate what they do in any moment of time? So I will often, I'll be sort of writing code and then the cat is sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to review a PR because I can't type. So all I can do at this moment in time is read. That's Lily, is her name. Previously, before we took her, the previous people who had her called her Hitler. Yay. I think that was rather cruel, and I think we were very glad to save her from such people. So she's called Lily. I have 3 cats and a dog as well. And I'll have a cup of coffee. And by the way, if you were ever building anything with Nuxt or any of my other projects, please feel free to message me on Twitter or Discord or whatever. I would love to help. And if you do that, I'll be sitting here at this desk probably typing a response. So do that. So this is the story of Elk, and it started in November of last year. Anthony Fu, who's one of my teammates on Nuxt, he's part of the core team, he dropped a little message in the chat just saying, hey, you know this Mastodon thing that's going on? Well, wouldn't it be an interesting idea if we built a Nuxt-based client for Mastodon? And one thing followed another, and a couple of days later, I got a GitHub invitation, a repo invitation link in my inbox. Well, that was the beginning. There were 4 of us who were part of that initial core team. So Anthony, Matthias Capelato, who's one of the key team members of Vite, and Kevin, who's one of the key team members, he's on the Vue team as well. And very, very, very quickly, things took off, despite not being public. Well, we launched Elk as a private repository, but we very, very quickly we had over 120 contributors before we launched publicly, and lots of different issues and PRs and so on. But I should tell you first what Elk is. And I should say, if you're able to look in those eyes without feeling a little bit of a tremor in your soul, I admire you. Elk is obviously not just an animal. I think that's an elk. I believe it is an elk. But it's a client for Mastodon. Now, Mastodon is a different kind of social network. Who here has heard of Mastodon? A few people. And anyone here actually have an account on Mastodon? Okay, so Mastodon is a social network that's built on a new protocol called ActivityPub. It's like Twitter in some kind of ways. People post their updates, you follow other people, and you have a feed based on other people's updates. But it's a little bit like email, because instead of there being one central server that controls everything, there are different servers, just like there are different email servers, and people have their own account. When you're followed by somebody else, they effectively say, hey, let me know when you update and when you post a new status. And then when they do that, their server tells your server about the new status. It's a way of having a decentralized network for social media. And in the past year, there have been one or two strange things on Twitter particularly that have made people start to think, hey, you know, it would be really a good idea if we weren't entirely dependent on the whims of Elon Musk for our experience, our social experience online. If you're anything like me, I love Twitter, by the way. What I love about Twitter is the fact that I can encounter people I haven't met before, hear about interesting projects, and learn. It's amazing. There's this whole world out there, and it feels like you can plug into it somehow, and it just transforms. Well, I love it. I love it. But more and more people began to think it's a shame if this experience, this thing that's going to enrich our lives, I guess, for all the negatives of social media, there's also some real richness that it brings. It'd be a shame if that were all locked behind Twitter and the current policy decisions of Twitter. So a lot of people started moving to Mastodon, but there were problems. So Mastodon, that's my email. Mastodon looks a little bit like this out of the box. So it has a web app. It's maybe a little bit unfamiliar, and it's maybe not so beautiful. And certainly, when you're browsing through in that tiny central column, you might start to think that there are some things we could do to improve this. And that is where Elk comes in. So Elk is a client for Mastodon. It allows us to connect to the same server and communicate via API so that we can actually browse in something which I hope is a little bit nicer. It has support for multiple accounts. It has support for push notifications and direct messages. You can see your favorites, bookmarks. It has list support. There are lots of user interface settings. You could say change the default theme color here, sorry, I don't want to blind you. You can enable different features. So we have incredible translations by lots of people in the community. We have quality of life improvements. For example, you can enable some well-being features to avoid the ceaseless rush of comparison on social media. There are lots of things that you can do with Elk. And it is installable. It's a PWA that is installable on your phone, your iPhone now, with the latest update, or your Android, or whatever else you have. That's Elk. It's a different client for Mastodon. Any questions about that, or do people, we're on board with what Elk is?
So there's loads of different kinds of clients for Mastodon?
There are other clients as well. Other clients are available. So there are clients for mobile, for example. Some are open source and free, like Elk. Some are paid. But yes, there are lots of different clients for Mastodon. It's I think one of the things I love about Mastodon is that it is open. So just as Twitter is locking down the API and saying, actually, you have to pay $100 a month in order to access it, Mastodon for developer is incredible. because you have, you can do anything with it. You can build anything on top of it. And that feels great because it puts the power in the hands of people. Just as Mastodon is decentralized, the fact that the API is open is also pretty cool too. So here are some things that this is how we built Elk. Some things that I think were important for us, that made the experience better, that helped our community grow and contribute. We've had over, as I said, over 162 contributors so far to Elk, and basically its growth is a product of that. So here are some of the things that I think have made that possible. And it's based on, some of this is about Max 3, some of it is more general. So to start with, in Elk, we use the feature of Max 3, which is auto imports. So rather than starting, looking at a component and starting off with a wall of sort of 10 import statements, actually we can get straight into the logic of the code. You get type support for all of that, so your IDE knows that these things are available to you in your environment, and they'll be suggested to you when you start typing. But actually, you don't have to see the specific import. You can option click and go to the source, and you get a type checking step, so you don't lose out on anything. But it means that the logic is front and center when you're looking at the Elk project. We also use a feature of Nux called middleware, where you can actually define particular protection patterns to run for accessing certain routes, both on the server and then also on the client when you're performing client-side navigation. And actually, we used something a little bit like this. This is actually a plugin to handle social previews. So Elk is purely client-side rendered. So no data about your account is actually exchanged or stored anywhere on the server. We don't render your account details. It's all API requests on your computer. And that is really important because privacy is important. Well, but we also want to be able to render a little social preview. Someone posts a Mastodon link into Discord or Twitter or anywhere that you want to be able to get that nice little, this person said this, maybe a little picture. And so we actually implemented it using a Nux plugin. We look for crawlers, and if a crawler is accessing the URL, we actually forward them on to the original server where that data is stored, which means actually all the preview information from the original server is returned, and you get the beautiful social preview. We don't touch it at all. And that was quite a nice little thing that, again, preserves privacy because it means that the original server can make its decision about what is exposed to search engines or not. Another thing that we did is, so Nux has a module system. So everything about Nux can be tweaked and changed. We have hooks that run at different stages in the build and development process. And users can write their own code, which hook into these things and change things about what's happening. So in the build process, in the bundle process, in setting up options, in registering imports and components, and writing manifests, everything you can configure and hook into yourself. This has always been true about Nux. But for Elk, we found that it was a really good practice to iterate by building new features as local modules. Actually, in the latest version of Nux, we released first-class support for auto-detecting and running local modules, and with hot module reload even in development. But basically what it means is you can isolate particular kinds of features of functionality, and then keep that separate, and then at some point you can release it as a separate package. And then other people can use that in their projects as well. So this is an example of a Nux module. This is one I built really early on in the process for Elk. We were iterating rapidly, and so we actually had comment. We would just comment bits of code out, and put a to-do comment in here, or we would we basically had comments everywhere. And one thing that is true about Vue is that comments are actually rendered in the HTML, and we didn't want that. We actually wanted our comments to be gone. We didn't want this to be true because we had obviously our collaborators in our closed repo, but people were discovering Elk and starting to use it. So we wanted to get rid of them. So we just wrote a little module which adds a plugin which simply removes the comment. And the thing there that we're doing with magic string is something to do with producing a source map. This could be even simpler if we didn't care about ensuring the source map was the case. Super simple. We wrote that module, extracted it from the project. It's now redistributable. So you could drop that into any project and it would just work automatically. Lots of modules actually were built, for Nux were actually built during the process of making Elk. So Vite PWA, for example, is a plugin for Vite that allows first-class PWA support. The maintainer for that got involved with Elk and actually built the Nux module in the process, and now that's installable separately. Also, Vue macros and Vue i18n also built modules and or improved them, bug fixes. The whole experience was amazing because you're dealing with, in this little project that we created, we're suddenly having core team members from different projects and libraries get involved, integrate their library, and actually make improvements and bug fixes and feed it back in. It's the best kind of dog fooding. For example, on the module side of things, there were loads more. One of the Tauri core team, you know Tauri enables you to build native apps wrapping a web view but without shipping Chromium. So it's built in Rust, it's tiny, and really performant. One of the Tauri joint core team got involved. We built a module for Tauri, integrated it, and now it would be ready to actually be shipped as a separate module, so other people could integrate with Tauri in the project. It was so much fun. These are just some of the other modules that we integrated in the project, and actually there are even more. I can't include them all. If you're interested in some of the things that Nux does support, check out nuxt.com/modules. We have a sort of community directory of modules that people are using.
Are they vetted in any way?
They are vetted in that when someone submits a request to be listed, or someone else on the core team, we look for best practices, we make recommendations, and we list the module. But we can't endorse them on an ongoing basis in that it's still a third-party package you have to take a look at. We do have a Nux community organization and a Nux modules organization on GitHub, and both of those we have much more control over. So there's continuity. If a developer ever stops maintaining a project, we can continue it. And there's other things as well. So if anyone reported an issue, we would be able to step in. But in general, it's left out to the maintainer. So hybrid serverless. This was another thing that we feature of Nux that we built. So that's a little module, a graph from Cloudflare of the requests to Elk. So over a 30-day period, we had 32 million requests, of which 200,000 were cached, 32 million were uncached. And the reason for that is we have a PWA module, which means that once you download an asset, it's never requested again. So those are 32 million requests, not for assets, but for pages in the app. So that's people browsing around. Those are hitting a serverless function. That is a lot of requests for a serverless function, I think. So we had to harness different features of Nux to actually make this possible, because otherwise it would be a killer in terms of costs. You can see there a little differentiation. That's actually bandwidth used. And you can see the vast majority of the bandwidth is cached. These are API requests and HTML requests that we're talking about that are that 32 million. So Nux ships with we completely rewrote the server for Nux 3. We call it Nitro. And it's usable without Nux. So if you want, I live coded building a React native framework at the last conference I spoke at. So you can use it for anything. It's everything I'm sharing today about this you could access without Nux or Vue. But one of the things that Nitro allows is the ability to have a hybrid serverless server. So you can have different rules which govern different parts of your app or routes within your app. So here, for example, we can say we want to pre-render the home page. We want a static app shell which is going to be the thing that we serve up to most users for most pages. And that's going to be able to, we don't want to regenerate that on every request. That's not going to change because we don't actually process user data on the server. It's all on the client side. So we can pre-render this. We can, at build time, render that and serve it up. The settings pages are a bit more complex. We're not going to pre-render those. Our API, so we have an endpoint, for example, as you start to type in your server name, we want to give some suggestions. Here are some servers that people have used before. Maybe it's one of these. And actually, why should every time a user hits that endpoint, it be updated? So we use SWR, stale while revalidate strategy, to mean that every 60 seconds, we will revalidate that data, but every request within that 60-second window will serve up the same data. And that just means that we can avoid, actually, we totally avoid hitting the serverless function at all, because that is, it works on Versal and Netlify. It's basically ISG, incremental static revalidation, I guess. Basically, the first request renders the JSON payload, stores it in the Netlify CDN. You get it directly from the CDN until that minute has expired, and then back again. And because we've built a platform-independent implementation in Nitro, you don't need to worry about whether you're deploying on Cloudflare, Vercel, Netlify, AWS Lambda, Azure Static Web Apps, or anything. This just works everywhere. We also wanted to do things like, I could give you more examples, but these are just the ones we're actually using in ELK. We wanted to set some headers for static files. Again, both Vercel and Netlify have their own ways of configuring this, but again, you can just configure it in Nitro, and the underscore headers file in Netlify is produced, or Vercel has its own build output API where we could configure the same thing. The way it works is that Nitro has this central serverless handler, which basically operates as a connector. So an incoming request comes, the central handler loads, if it's not already one. It decides what route data needs to be loaded, and then it lazily loads the code to respond to those requests, which means that code is not passed, it's not loaded unless you're actually hitting those endpoints. And that's true also for static files, which we can handle. It also means that within your app, if in one page of your app you want to perform a request to your own API, that doesn't hit the network layer at all. We actually perform it as a direct function call, and it completely bypasses the network layer through means of this central controller. We also have auto detection for all the platforms that I've put on the slide, as well as lots of others too, and you can build your own. And we are able basically to do that by detecting the CI environment when you're building your app. So if it's being built on Netlify or Cloudflare Pages or Azure Static Web Apps workflow or whatever it is, we know, and we can produce a different kind of build output for them. And this is all just built into Nitro. That means when we went from Nux 2 to Nux 3, I did this test just 2 days ago as part of the workshop. We went from over 300 millisecond cold start to 1.277 millisecond cold start for a Nitro server. That was actually a Nitro server which we built, which had integration with Supabase, it had auth, it had server routes, it had a view renderer, it had like as full of an app as you can build in a workshop. So we're talking about this thing is really, really fast because of how it's architected. So there's lots more to say. This is not going to be that relevant to people, but we also built Nitro so that it would be, it wouldn't be platform dependent. So it works in Node, but it also works in Dino. It also works in Cloudflare Workers. So nothing there, even though we do have mocks for various Node APIs, nothing is dependent on a Node environment. So actually, when I was building the Tauri native implementation, because we wanted to package this up as a desktop app, which doesn't have a server. There is no server for it to store OAuth information in. But rather than have to rework it entirely, this is virtually all of the code I wrote. It's a little bit hacky. So don't use it, but basically, I just moved the server into the browser, as you do. So we have a server running in the browser that now handles, for the desktop app, that handles the OAuth secrets and so on. It was fun. We also have stackable contexts in Nuxt. So you can actually, for all of these different features of Nuxt, from components which are auto-imported, composables, and utilities are auto-imported, pages generate routes. The whole server side of things also have routes and middleware and configuration. All of these things work in layers. So you can say, here are 5 apps, merge them, and you get a single Nuxt app which includes all of that, just seamlessly merged. And so we actually use this in Elk for building our Elk native, because effectively what we want is to have our web app, but with certain customizations and things that are different for a native desktop application. So that's a cool feature too. But I don't want to get too distracted. But this is how we were able to do it. We just put an extends key. And that was a string. You could pass an array of stuff as well and add a few modules, and we're away. It does also overlays public folders, so we even have different folders with different images for the main, the staging, and the dev environment. So actually, those are layered in, and so if in different contexts, different images take priority. Okay, runtime config. So we deploy Elk. We have our hosted elk.zone, but we also allow other people to deploy it. So it's deployed by at least 10 Mastodon servers have their own Elk deploy as their sort of official front end. And they obviously need to deploy that. We publish a Docker file. We deploy to Netlify, and we use Cloudflare KV storage. But other providers use different things. They might store data on the file system. They might deploy to Vercel. They might deploy to Cloudflare. There are different, and so all of this means, and they might have a different default instance. We default to a Mastodon instance that I run called Web Tools, but there are others. And so all of this is configurable at runtime using something called Nuxt runtime config, which is fully typed and allows people to configure by setting an environment variable, which then flows into the rest of their app. Highly recommend that kind of runtime config setting. And yes, it's type safe. Here's another thing. I'm so sorry. There's so much I want to say, and I'm not going to be able to say it in the time. But anyway, we have KV storage. And we were on the home stretch. Don't worry about this. We have KV storage because this is a common need. We have a provider-agnostic implementation. So you can just write and read key values, which can, depending on your preference, be written and read to the file system, to memory, to Redis, to Planet Scale, to various Azure implementations. You can write your own as well. We even wrote an implementation for our own project, which uses the platform native Tauri storage. And you can do the same. And it basically means that we're able to leave all of this up to the end user or to an environment variable flag rather than hard coding it in the app, which again, I think is something that really, really helps the distribution of Elk and for people to be able to use it in their own contexts. And we even built a unit testing framework for Nuxt, which we've dog-fooded on Elk. So there it is, elk.zone. Check it out. If you don't have a Mastodon account, do create one. I can recommend Pachyderm as a good, yes, it's a pun on Pachyderm. And I can recommend that as a great server to get started. It's run by Chris Nova, who is a fantastic person. You can try out Mastodon and try out Elk if you want to. There's lots more that we built that I don't have time to talk about today. I will just give you one little hint for one of the things we were able to do to help people getting started with Elk. Here's a, no, not that, goodness. I'll just launch it here. Here is a local version of Elk running in my browser. One of the things that we wanted to do was give people a great experience when they were trying Elk for the first time. So we have a DevTools. This is a Nuxt DevTools. But just to give you an example of one of the things you can do, if you're browsing the project and you want to help, maybe you want to submit a PR and you don't really know how it works, you can actually pick a bit of the page and decide, oh, hey, I want to fix that. Click it and you'll go straight there in your IDE. There's lots more that you can explore. Try Elk out and try Nuxt out, because we've tried to use Elk as a way of dog fooding and improving the framework experience as well. This is what one guy had to say. This is one of the contributors. He said he had never written any Vue before, and he contributed a significant feature to help support for lists. So if you want to do that, feel free to message me. I would love to help you do it, even if you've never used Vue, even if you've never used Nuxt. The great thing about Elk, from my point of view, is this is an opportunity to customize your own experience of social media and fix all of the rough edges and bugs that you find frustrating with something like Twitter, but which you can't fix. You can with Elk, and you can with Mastodon. Here are some details about how you might go a bit further and find out a little bit more about Elk or about Nuxt, or probably me as well. You can contact me that way too. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
I think I finally understand Mastodon, so that was good. We're really short on time, so if you want to swap out, if you have questions for Daniel, you can just ask him right outside in the hallway. Otherwise, we'll get Rafael set up, and this will be the last session in this room for the day. Thanks, Daniel. Can you do the StreamYard stuff? Did you do that already? Okay, cool. What do you need? An adapter? Oh, you got that. Oh, can he borrow your adapter for the talk? Is that okay? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, cool. That's Daniel, in case you don't remember. Okay.
Thank you. So, okay, that's great.
It's like you're just at the end instead of the beginning.
Yeah.
You can give a memento style talk. Do your talk in reverse order. Let's see if it makes sense. Time travel speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The little green button usually. That should work. Yeah. Awesome. I don't have one. Yeah, he'll be all right. He'll live. Okay.
That's fine.
All right. Let's give it up for Rafael.
Hello.
Hello, folks. Do you hear me well? Yeah. Okay. So everything okay there? All right. So I will talk about performance. I mean, I love performance. I love finding issues, finding very deeply issues, and in the end, I fix it, and then I break something else. That's my goal. Okay. And finding performance issues is not easy. It normally requires a lot of steps, a lot of workflows, and you end up staring at the screen for a long time, and then you decide, okay, I will walk with my dog because I don't have no idea about that. And well, that's why Clinic.js exists. Okay, Clinic.js is a Node.js tool that you can use for diagnose and your Node application and see what's going on and perhaps finding the real problem and fix it, okay? So it tracks latency between operations. It contains a CPU profiling. It contains a memory profiling. It contains also a way to measure async hooks, internal things from Node.js. And well, that's very good. So first of all, my name is Rafael Gonzaga. I'm from Brazil. I'm staff engineer at Nearform and Node.js TSC member, core member of Festify, and maintainer of Clinic.js. So I'm a bit biased here. But if you like this kind of content, I'm trying to do live streams on Twitch, okay? It's not natural nowadays. It's very difficult to keep the audience, you know? But I will keep doing that, okay? So let's imagine you have a Node.js application with thousands of lines of code, and after 1 or 2 weeks of monitoring, you see that the performance decreased for some reason. And well, the obvious path is, okay, I will go to the Git history, and then I will fix it. I will look to who did the bad commit, I will revert it. But normally, this is not a good approach because performance does not appear in a single commit. It's in several of them. It's a sequence of commits, okay? And so how can developers find performance issues? That's why we use Clinic.js. But, well, one of one approach you can follow is, okay, you can read all the code, all the 1,000 lines of code, and guess what's the problem. You can walk with your dog, as I said. You can talk with a rubber duck, or you can be a bit more practical and use building modules. Like you can require VH, you can use get active handles, dash desk prof, dash desk CPU prof, use Chrome dev tools. You can also use environment tools like eBPF, strace, Linux perf, but that's required time, okay? That's time consuming. Or you can just npm install clinic, okay? It contains a quartet of tools, okay? I'm going to all those. So let's imagine a HTTP server, a FastFi one. So if you don't use FastFi, please do. Basically, every request that I receive, I check if I have a data.txt, and then if I have, I will override the data with my latest request ID, okay? This is just to simulate an synchronous operation. And then if you run it with clinic doctor, basically the command is pretty simple. You run clinic doctor, and then you pass the load generator tool. I'm using autocannon, but you can use Apache benchmark. You can use the JMeter. Doesn't really matter as long as you produce load. You can even send a lot of curl requests, but I don't recommend. And then you pass the application. In my case, is node index.js, and it will generate the following graph. Okay. I have the CPU usage, memory usage, I have event loop delay, I have the active handles, usually is the amount of concurrent requests you send. And one of the things that the clinic doctor points to you is like a doctor, okay? It will see your problem and will point, okay, this is your problem and this is how you can fix it. I won't fix it for you, okay? So it detected a potential event loop issue, and one of the recommendations, if you click on below, is to either use Clinic Flame. Clinic Flame was created for CPU profiling, okay? Or you use the --trace sync.io. If you use it, it's pretty simple. Just trace sync.io, curl request, and then you get some warnings about, okay, don't use synchronous operations on Node.js. Otherwise, you block the event loop. Pretty simple. If you don't want to use that flag, you can also use the Clinic Flame. The command is the same. You just replace doctor by flame, okay? And it will generate the following flame graph. Who knows what is a flame graph? Raise the hand, please. Okay. Flame graph is basically a way to visualize what's going on in your application. Basically, wire blocks means more time spent in the CPU, and the y-axis you can read by call stack. So in that case, we have the parse on header complete, that code, parse on incoming, and so on. Okay, it's easy, and it's like different from flame chart. If you use Chrome Dev Tools, you see that I can profile in my application there, but you see things over time, and the flame graphs abstract the time for you. Okay, so it's way easier to find a bottleneck. So as I said, if you want to take a picture of how to read a flame graph, it's your chance now, okay? It's very useful, and I'm pretty sure in any language you can do that, okay? Generate a flame graph. Okay, in your case, we have generated the flame graph, and then, as we can see here, the problem is in the CPU line 6. Line 6 is the or call of exist sync and write sync. So, okay, obviously, as the trace sync.io the flag told you, this is the problem, okay? And if you want to go a bit deeper on that, I mean, I love it, is you can use the flag --kernel-tracing. It will retrieve all the C++ symbols from V8 and Node.js using Linux perf events. But, you know, if you use Windows or macOS, I'm sorry, it doesn't work for you. But yeah, it will generate the following flame graph. I mean, it's pretty much the same one, but the difference, if you click on the block, you'll be able to see that it shows when a code is optimized or not. When a code is optimized, it means that it was compiled by the turbofan. from JavaScript. And when it's not compiled, it's interpreted. So it will say here non-optimized. But it's tricky because nowadays V8 has 3 compilers: the interpreter, Sparkplug, and Turbofan. Turbofan is the optimized one, but you can have an intermediary compiler called Sparkplug that is also slow, not as slow as interpreter, but is slow. But this will help you. And also, if you click on V8 when you use kernel tracing, you'll be able to see this horrible thing here. Very hard to understand, but if you go deeper, it's about syscalls in your system. So you'll be able to see, okay, this is the real problem. It's very hard to find it. I mean, in a real world application, it won't help you a lot. But if you are debugging Node.js, this will help you. Well, if you really want to use it in production, you'll be able to using the following flags: collect only, because as you know, in the servers, if you want to do SSH in the server, I don't recommend, but you'll be able to collect data without the browser, and then you send the HTML file to your machine, and then you open it. It's easy, but it will drop your performance. I don't recommend. So what about memory? Well, it's basically the same. Replace Flame by Hep Profiler, and then you get another profiling view. On Nearform, we have several workshops around Clinic, and one of them is this exercise that I won't give you the solution. So if you want to try Clinic.js, really download this fork, this project, and try to solve it. It's easy, but it's tricky. Basically, it's an HTTP server. Whenever I receive a request, it will load the template. The template calls the require name is a module, and this module basically returns a random name. But there is a memory leak here, okay? And if you run it with the Clinic heap profiler, it will generate the following flame graph, basically pointing to you, okay, name is the function leaking memory, okay? It's important to say that it measures the amount of memory allocated by a function, not if that's leaking or not, okay? So if you want to see, okay, my Node.js app is consuming a lot of memory, if you use it, you'll see which function is using more memory in the stack, okay? And well, there's another exercise. This is very interesting. It's called, it's a round off or workshop, and basically we have this ugly code here, and whenever I receive a request, I will find in my MongoDB database the 5 newest operations, and then I will find the 5 oldest operations, records actually. And well, if you do it and run with doctor, it will tell you, okay, doctor has found a potential I/O issue. What does that mean? Normally, when you are profiling, when you are producing load to your application, the CPU shouldn't be below 100%, I would say. Why? Because you are producing load, you expect it to be on the top. If that's below than 50%, it means that something is waiting until complete to conclude. So it means that your I/O operation is I don't know, killing the performance of your application. So for instance, let's say that I'm performing HTTP call, and I'm waiting for this HTTP call so I can continue my work. But that's not why Node.js was designed. As you have heard, Node.js is non-blocking operation, so you shouldn't block it, okay? That's the recommendation. So if you see the CPU usage on the top, below, actually, a small percentage, it means that you are doing something wrong. And the recommendation in that case is to use the bubble prof. Well, if you run it with bubble prof, it will generate some bubbles. And it's difficult to read, but we have a great documentation around that. Basically, each bubble means each asynchronous operation. Not totally asynchronous, because as you can see on the top, just in that code, we had 2,000 asynchronous calls. So it's hard to debug, right? So we make it a bubble, so we can expand it and see what's going on. And if you look to this and click in the first bubble, is basically our code to the object index.js in the line 11, and basically is our first call, right? Our first MongoDB call. And then if you open it and expand, we will see that there is another call in the index.js line in the line correct for the oldest path. And if I go below, just a few slides ago before, you see that we have one bubble, and the npm carry, this one is executing, and then I call the second one. It means that I wait for something until I dispatch another one. So this is a problem, at least what bubble tells you. And what you can do is, well, use promise.all. Very simple. You perform 2 carries not at the same moment, but it will be dispatched. And if you run it with bubble, you'll see that there's only one bubble now. So actually, there's 2 bubbles, but they are not dependent on each other. So we are good. Well, happy debugging. A few considerations before. I just don't know about my time. Do you know? Okay. Aries told me to run, but not this way. No, I mean, just a few considerations is like promise.all is not always a good thing, okay? If you don't have limits, it will burn your application. I say that because I saw TensorFlow perform a lot of consultants in big companies, and it's bad. So, and yeah, that's it, guys. I won't speak too much because I'm hungry, honestly. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Now we have. Well, that's a good question. There are 2 ways to. Nowadays, people find performance issues when this is a problem. That's when you use it. But I normally go to the libraries I maintain and use it regularly to see what's going on. But I do have monitoring set up, like, okay, this performance decreased, or this app decreased the performance, so I will use the tool. I don't need to use every single day. Yes. Well, Clinic.js, yes, but it won't get you reliable results for benchmarks because it wraps your application. It means that it will drop the performance by almost 30%. Yes. By the way, I have a tool. I have, if you go to my GitHub, I have one project called Autobench. It's basically this. You send a pull request. This pull request will be integrated in a CI. We will benchmark it, see if the performance decrease, if there are performance regression or not. If exists, we will request change, and we'll say, okay, you are doing something wrong. Don't do that. Yeah. Oh, this project in specific is just comparing a request per second and the throughput of a HTTP application. Yeah. That's it. Any further question? Good? Okay. Hope to see you guys opening issues in the...
I definitely had a blast and would recommend coming to this event the next time it's on. I'm not sure when they'll be on next, but it is a really good event to meet people who
have Number 9 of 20, whose phone's gonna ring? Oh, yes, we've got a person. We got a winner. Let's give them a round of applause.
Now with some accent, but now most of you I think you're from Greece, so I don't have to pretend that I have an accent. I can speak Greek English, okay? And now we can continue to
the compact system, the barrier control. So it's quite a complex system. So
It's really cool. Like I learned a lot from them. I also learned a lot of things from
Okay? And now, clap your hands.